Every year at this time, we ask Americans to tell us, open-endedly, no prompting, who the man is and who the woman is living anywhere in the world that they most admire. Let's look at the results. First, for women, it is Hillary Clinton. She tops the list. She has been topping the list now for a number of years, with one exception. In 2001, the then current First Lady Laura Bush was most admired. But other than that, Hillary Clinton has been near or at the top of the list for well over a decade, even though, of course, she's not been the First Lady, going all the way back to when her husband left office back in January of 2001. Behind Hillary Clinton comes Oprah Winfrey, the talk show host who is now trying to change things around the world, at least based on her own perceptions of what she wants to do. Then coming in third, Malala Yousafzai, who is, of course, the Pakistani woman who won the Nobel Peace Prize, youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize, for her efforts on behalf of children's, girls, and women's rights in her native country. Beyond that, Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, Michelle Obama, the First Lady, then Angelina Jolie, which is an interesting person on this list, Sarah Palin, who of course ran as the vice presidential nominee back in 2008, and then Princess Kate, who of course has been very much in the news. First ladies typically don't win this rating. I mentioned Hillary Clinton. She won several times when she was First Lady back in the 1990s, but not all the time. Margaret Thatcher won in the first years of the Clinton administration. Laura Bush, as I mentioned, has won only once. Michelle Obama has never been at the top of the list as most admired woman. And going back in history, you see occasionally the First Lady would be mentioned, but more often than not, for the Reagan administration, the first Bush administration, and going back through the Ford administrations and the Nixon administrations, you simply don't see First Ladies mentioned a lot at the top of the list. In fact, 3 First Ladies never made it while they were First Lady. Michelle Obama, as I mentioned. Lady Bird Johnson was never at the top of the list of most admired when her husband Lyndon Johnson was president, and Mamie Eisenhower never made it while her husband was president, although Mamie Eisenhower was at the top of the list later on after her husband had left office. What about men? Most admired man? Barack Obama. He's been at the top of the list every year since he's been president. In fact, he also won in 2008 after he had won, but before he was inaugurated. He's followed by Pope Francis, former President Bill Clinton, Billy Graham, and I'll say a little more about Billy Graham in a minute, and then George W. Bush. Other names on the list that are mentioned by enough people to put them on the top 10, Ben Carson, the African-American physician who is thinking about getting into politics, Stephen Hawking, the physicist who's been handicapped with a disease most of his life, about whom there has been a movie recently, that's probably why he's on the list, and Bill O'Reilly, the talk show host on Fox News. I mentioned Billy Graham. The reason that's important is he has been in the top 10 lists more than any other man since Gallup has been doing these top 10 lists going back to the 1940s. The Reverend Billy Graham, who's still alive, has been on the list, the top 10 list, 58 times, by far the most of any other male over the history of our using this type of procedure to measure most admired. Second on the list, Ronald Reagan, then Jimmy Carter, Pope John Paul II, and Bill Clinton. On the female side, who's been on the list more than any other? Well, if you guessed Queen Elizabeth, you are right. She's been in the top 10 46 times, going all the way back to when she was a princess in the 1950s before she was crowned as Queen of England. Margaret Thatcher, Jacqueline Kennedy, Onassis, Oprah Winfrey, and Hillary Clinton round out the women that have been on the top 10 list among most admired females in the history of our Asking the List. One last point, you have to be alive to be on the list, so it's unlikely that Billy Graham's position as having been on the list more than any other person is going to be broached anytime soon because he's so far ahead of other people. The 2 living individuals who are closest are Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton, but they're 20 years behind, so they would have to be mentioned at the top 10 and stay alive for 20 more years to come close to or beat Billy Graham in terms of number of years on the top 10 list of men Americans admire most. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.